it's because it's just very painful.
Mm-hmm.
And so what Melissa Doy was describing was intense pain.
Yes.
Not thermal heat, but the sensation to her nerve endings.
Are you saying then, because again, going back to the building without going into all the science of it right here, these buildings pulverized. They didn't pulverize, they dustified. They dustified. These people are saying, I'm so hot. They're standing out on a ledge. And what really struck me about the people portion of this, I couldn't get it off my mind, is that, and it struck me about this at the time. First of all, I was under the impression for some reason that, maybe a few dozen people had jumped. Yet you're saying a massive number of people jumped, fell, or were propelled from these ledges. And the emergency help on the ground was saying it was raining people. People were falling out of the air at the rate of 1 every 30 or 40 seconds. But that's not human nature to jump.
Exactly. And those poor firefighters they're trained to save lives. And they felt so helpless. I think there was even one that they had to watch because he wanted to go out and catch people.
Yeah.
You feeling helpless has got to be the worst human experience.
Well, and just the oddness of that many people supposedly jumping. Well, first of all, are you saying they were jumping, or because you said you have some pictures in there where they didn't all look like they were jumping. Some of them looked as though they were caught off guard. Right.
I'm just putting the data out there. It's cumulative data, and it just keeps you wondering what is going on here. We don't have to come to a conclusion with each chapter, but we can sum things up and say, this is not normal. A fire doesn't cause people to behave this way. Bombs in the building don't cause people to behave this way.
Yes. What they were doing, the way they were behaving, or perhaps the way they were feeling inside their own skin was not anything that we would recognize as normal. Something abnormal was happening. And taking it from there, the emergency workers, firemen, and so forth were saying, when the people landed on the ground, and this is very bothersome. I mean, this is just really not a pleasant thought or scene in our minds. But the people didn't just fall and crunch, like what normally would happen at a free fall speed. They were exploding. There were body parts everywhere.
Yes, and that is a very kind of delicate thing. I myself endured a near-fatal injury from being hit by a vehicle traveling in excess of 80 miles per hour. So this is the first time I think I've said this, but I had a real connection with those jumpers because of that. It was, that their free fall speed, their terminal velocity, can't be much more than that in street clothes. And you know that when you hit a deer with a vehicle, it's busted up. And, probably won't live. There's very little chance of survival, but there is a chance. And it's busted up. You don't have a fingernail over here, a tooth over there, a rib over here. It doesn't take things apart like that. Impacts.
No, it doesn't. And I was talking to Scott about this, and what we both came to, of course, is it sounded more like a human, or when you hear these horrid stories of little children experimenting and putting a little animal inside a microwave or something awful like that. This sounded really much more along that line than anything that would be a normal fall, and the injuries or death from a normal fall.
Right. There was definitely something different going on there.
Yeah, it was almost as though they were being microwaved and splattering and blowing, literally their bodies, pieces blowing apart. And how many people are we talking about that actually fell, jumped, or were propelled out of the building?
About 1,200, estimated from the firemen's testimonies, about 1,200 out of the North Tower. And then you add to that the 343 firefighters, you get, 1,543, and that's about as much DNA samples, different people approximately, that were identified. So that raises another question.
And that question is?
Those on the first or second or third floor, firefighters, or those who jumped from the building or left the building out the windows seem to be the only samples of DNA that remained.
And I guess you're not going to speculate as to what happened to the rest.
Well, it makes you wonder about dustification.
Yes, it does. And, as people are listening to this right now, we've listened to enough other interviews, especially from those who believe that this was the result of a demolition, a controlled demolition. And one of the things that comes up repeatedly is, well, if this wasn't a controlled demolition, then why were all of these firefighters reporting hearing a series of explosions, especially down in the lower levels?
Well, if you're dustifying a building, that means the material is like coming apart. It's losing its strength and integrity. The towers had water tanks every so many floors. You can't pump water all the way directly to the top anyway, so they pump it to different holding tanks every so many floors. Now, imagine what will happen when those water tanks start to dissolve and lose their integrity. They're going to rupture.
Mm-hmm.
Or an air pressure tank. When the wall thickness gets so thin or loses a certain amount of strength, it's going to explode.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, there were firefighters at ground level, quite a few of them, who witnessed Scott tanks exploding.
What is a Scott tank?
They're the air tanks that the firefighters wear so they can breathe good air while they're in the smoky environment.
Oh, and they were exploding as well?
Sitting on the fire trucks. They're exploding.
Yeah. That's, again, we're talking about people who almost appear to have exploded, a building that has turned to dust. 1,200 people were driven to either fall or jump to their death, which I still have a hard time getting my mind around that one. It's appalling. I had no idea it was that number of people. And now you're talking about these exploding Scott tanks that were sitting in their trucks. Let's take that a little bit further when we're talking about these explosions. There were cars and trucks, including fire trucks, that were toasted and literally taken into the air in some cases. Talk about that if you would, please.
I refer to them as toasted cars because they're toast. Their history.
Yeah.
I don't know I can't decide what happened to them. Instead of trying to force them into, burned or whatnot, I just say that they're toast. And it seemed to be the cars, I started noticing this pattern, there's flip cars, but they didn't seem to be as toasted as the upright cars. And this one particular picture is a toasted car, and in front of it there's an upside down car. It's parked like in the right place, it's just wheels in the air.
Right.
And you wouldn't think it'd park that way.
Well, no, you wouldn't think it would park that way.
And there's a particular quote by Rene Davila that I liked. When being questioned, he's by a supervisor. He says, "Well, was your vehicle destroyed?" Yeah, it was destroyed. Was it on fire? What? Was it on fire? Fire? We saw the sucker blow up. We heard a boom.
Yeah. And not only that, some of the cars that went boom were 7 blocks away. Now, this gets pretty controversial. I mean, everything here is controversial, but...
What do you mean controversial?
Well, I mean, it seems like this would be sort of a non sequitur scientifically. Why would cars blow up or be not blow up, but be incinerated 7 blocks away during this event?
And in between, without burning paper.
Without burning paper. How's that? How's that possible?
That's why I use toasted instead of burned, because that's weird. I call it weird fires. I have to have a different term for it. There's a firefighter who was over by FDR Drive and saw this car go into spontaneous combustion, and thinking it's got to be a normal situation. He's trying to fit what's happened into that. So, well, it must have been a fireball that rolled down the street and hit the car.
Yeah.
He didn't see the fireball, but how else can you explain a car going into spontaneous combustion?
Well, yeah, exactly. And why 7 blocks from the scene? That makes no sense whatsoever. And yet this all happened in roughly the same time frame. And at the same time, the people that were there as this was occurring, speaking of combustion, a lot of the witnesses there were saying there was this odd sensation. They weren't, as you say, there wasn't the kind of seismic activity that you would have expected. There wasn't the crunching and coming down of the building sound you would have expected. But a lot of them had the sense that they had been swept into the center of a tornado or some kind of weather event.
And there was one EMT who thought maybe she must have died, because how else was she floating down the stairs but having God pick her up and carry her down the stairs?
Yes, floating.
Right, and it was this one particular eyewitness was talking about. He says, I don't remember the sound of the building hitting the ground.
Yeah.
Someone told me that it was measured on the Richter scale. I don't know how true that is. But if the building was hitting the ground hard, how do I not remember the sound of it?
Yeah, I think I have him written down. Michael Ober, I think was his name.
Yep,
he was
exactly.
an EMT. And again, this feeling, people were picked up and they were tossed about and they would land 30, 40 feet from where they had started, just picked up, and they landed somewhere else. Cars. There's a picture you have on one of the pages of a car that had simply been picked up, and it looked as though it had been placed on top of a little wooden fence. I mean, it's a very odd picture.
That's Hurricane Wilma.
Oh, that's Hurricane Wilma. So
right.
this,
I was drawing the comparison with the same type of energy fields.
Yeah, that same thing where it's just picked up and set down, which, again, when you're looking at that, if you want to talk about that for just a second, why were you drawing the comparison between Hurricane Wilma and the energy signature of what was happening there that day? What's going on?
Well, we started out talking about hurricanes, and
yes.
When I got to looking at the dust and how the dust went up, and that was another comment that Michael Ober had made, is that he thought he was inside somewhere, and some said, no, you're outside. It's just it's dark out. 100% of the sunlight was blocked out by this dust that went up. For I don't know, half hour afterwards, it was up and blocking out the sunlight. And so I decided to look to see where it went when it went up, and I looked at some weather satellite pictures, thinking I could get a better look at this dust going up. And what's this? This hurricane.
Yeah.
That was the first time I saw the hurricane. And like, how weird that we weren't told about this. I don't remember anything about a hurricane. And it was a Category 3. And it was headed right to New York City for 4 days straight, straight line. Well, I wonder what hurricanes can do. So I started looking into that. And they're like a giant Tesla coil. And they produce a static field around them. And that interferes with other types of signals. And, people who have arthritis or other people often talk about feeling the weather coming.
Mm-hmm.
They can feel that field effect ahead of the storm. The same with the reason why birds leave town or spiders pack up their webs. They sense the storm coming because they feel that field effect.
Mm-hmm.
And also in hurricanes, you have cars sitting on fences. And hurricanes are a big torsion field. And a smaller, quicker acting one is